This is the Critical Therapy Antidote podcast with your hosts, Jaco van Sale and Christine Stephen. Welcome back, everybody. We're so excited today to share with you our next episode in our series called Parents Surviving the Gender Cult. And who we have with us today is Charlotte. And in just a moment, we're going to hear Charlotte's story and what she went through, as well as what her child went through. And we'll just kind of go from there. So Charlotte, welcome to the show. We're very excited to have you today.
Thank you.
So why don't you start by just giving us a little bit of background about just when this all began, when you first noticed there were issues, with your child, and maybe even a little bit before that, a bit about what your child was like growing up. Maybe we can start there.
Okay. Well, I'm one of the unfortunate ones who's been in this nightmare since 2015, thereabouts. My son, to give you the full background, I have two children. Both of them were adopted at birth. My son was 24 hours old when we brought him home. It was an open adoption. We met his birth mother. She did have some pretty significant mental health challenges, according to the birth grandmother, her mother. She had been diagnosed with pretty severe ADHD, which I do believe my son did inherit, not severe, but he definitely, we tried some medication, and that I hated that because it just made him someone he was not. But he struggled academically, even though he's a pretty bright kid. Struggled socially a bit. Definitely did not mature as much. He went to a private Catholic school, and we had a carpool with 6 boys. And as things progress from freshman to senior, I could see all of these other boys maturing. Mm-hmm. And my son was not at the same pace. I mean, very sensitive, sweet kid, but just, he wasn't an academic. He wasn't a jock, a little quirky. And then at about junior high, he started to really get into anime and cosplay. And I encouraged it. I thought, oh, he's found his tribe. This is fun for him. And he was, of course, meeting people online and going to cosplay conventions. I bought him tickets to go. I thought it was a positive thing. I've since learned, that's kind of been the gateway.
Can you say more about that being the gateway?
Yeah.
Just briefly about
if you kind of scratch the surface with anime, there's a lot of cartoon pornography, I think, that gets introduced. On the surface, it looks pretty harmless. I think, once you get online and, as the kids get older, the one thing my son told me when when he told me he was transgender, I said, well, why do you believe that? And he said, well, when I'm doing role play with anime online, I like to be the female characters. So they like, and I've since learned that there's, pedophiles that log on to these role play sites. And I think, maybe it's encouraged for these boys to take on feminine roles. I don't really know that much.
And would you say that these role play sessions or scenes would be of an erotic nature?
I did not see that, but I did when I did find on his phone some cartoon pornography, kind of in the anime genre.
Yes.
And then he became very obsessed with My Little Pony. and role-playing games online, My Little Pony. And I think that, and calling themselves bronies. And I've since learned that, there's adult male bronies. And I think they troll those sites. So I think that was the original gateway. And then once he graduated high school, we barely drug him across the finish line. He was going to go to the local JC, and in maybe it was his second semester. Yeah, I think it was the second semester. We decided, this is one of the few JCs where they have a dorm, and it was only about 20 minutes from our house. And I thought, being immature, this would be a good place for him to learn to be on his own a little bit. We'd still be in town, but so, I really pressured him, are you sure, you want to do this? It'll get you ready to go away to college in 2 years. And yes, he wanted to do that. That did not turn out well at all. Like I say, in his second semester, he had to take a women's study course to fulfill a requirement. And he chose an LBGTQ course taught by, I think, a queer professor. And that was where the hook was. That's where they set the hook in him. And he, when he first started taking the class, he would jokingly say in front of me and my daughter, he's like, yeah, he goes, I think I'm only one of about 3 guys in there that aren't gay. And my sister, of course, she's antagonizing. She goes, they think you're gay, Kyle, believe me. And I just laughed. I said, oh, you stop it. And anyway, so we would talk about it. Well, then, slowly but surely, as the class progressed, I noticed that he had hooked up with this group of gals that were in the class, and every one of them were either on the autism spectrum or had severe family trauma issues, homelessness, family members. I went to one of the homes of the parents. He was dog sitting, and it was almost inhabitable. And so this became his little girl tribe in that class. And then they introduced him to the Sacramento Gender Health Center, which is quite a little. At the time when I visited, they've changed it up quite a bit, but it was quite the little house of horrors, in my opinion. I went there with him twice and visited, trying to understand. I mean, at this point, I was just like, okay, well, let me help you figure this out. Tell me what this is all about. So we went down there. I met with the therapist that he saw, and she was barely older than him. She was an intern at Sacramento State College, and she was getting her credits for doing internship. And it's my understanding that he met with her once and then went directly downstairs to the hormone clinic run by UC Davis Health Center. And at the time when I read the credentials of all of the staff that worked at the Gender Health Center, it was nothing short of horrifying. One of the staff members, a paid staff member, one of his qualifications that they put right there on the website was a former sex worker. When you went into the office, that way back then, you could walk in and out of the office. Now it's very tightly controlled. Everywhere, in every surface, there was, bowls of condoms and pins that had flowers manufactured out of condoms at the top, just
wow.
And I asked the staff, I said, so what's with all the condoms? And they said, well, this population, tends to have a very high rate of, STDs and HIV and such. And so I'm like, okay, wow. So where's this going with my kid, who still barely had, he'd had 2 short-term girlfriends. And I think that's kind of what pushed him to this too, because he hadn't matured. When he did have these girlfriends, they kind of threw themselves at him, and it scared him, I think, honestly. He just wasn't ready for it. So all of these things, I think, played a part in his succumbing to this fantasy. And this is an interesting time for us to be meeting, because my daughter just left here, and she happened to fill me in for the first time in almost 2 years. She's in contact with my son, and she's fully supportive of, she's very, very captured, very woke. Before, like, even when I would ask, she wouldn't hardly tell me anything about him. And I finally just stopped asking, because it was so painful that she wouldn't share, that, because I used to just beg, just tell me he's alive, that he's okay.
So there was a rift that happened between you and your son.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
When was that? How did that come about?
That was probably 2018, 19. Okay. And I really went off the rails. I did not handle, once I fully realized, back in the day when I, was exposed to this, the only thing that I could find was Fourth Wave Now. So that's where I went. And, when I realized what the reality of this was, I was not having it. I mean, I went to therapy. I took him to therapy, and to a non-affirming therapy. He was a psychotherapist, PhD psychotherapist. He was the husband of the therapist that I was seeing. And I liked them both very much. And they never affirmed. They were all about trauma. This kid has had trauma, whether it's from the ultimate abandonment of being placed for adoption. I don't know, but that could be. He definitely was bullied in school, not to a great extent, because he was in parochial school. But I know it happened. I mean, just because he wasn't as mature, and I don't know that it was anything more than just kind of being picked on for being different, for being vulnerable. But we talked through that. I never really had to, intervene with the school, but I know it affected him. He was a really sensitive kid from the very beginning, even as a baby, just really, as a toddler, really sensitive.
What was the referring problem? In other words, when he decided to go to that intern therapist at the gender clinic, the gender health center, why did he decide to go to that therapist? What was the referring problem?
I'm assuming, and I'm pretty certain about this, that, I want to go on hormones. Okay, well, you need to see a therapist. How he started at the gender clinic, they held support groups where all these teens would come and get together and hang out in the evening, a couple times a week. And he just, when I started to really question the gender health center, I mean, he almost became panicky. He said, you will not ruin one of the only thing that's ever made me feel, good and whole is this gender health center and the people there and the support group. So, they just love bombed him.
Yes.
Love bombed. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's when our rift started. And he became more rebellious. I became more hysterical. I mean, one night I chased him down in his car. I mean, it was horrible. I mean, I made a lot of mistakes, and I've since apologized over and over and over for those things. And, but he's just gone no contact with me, because he knows I'm not buying it.
What's that like for you now, to kind of have this rift between the two of you?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, in the essay I wrote for Pitt, I really became suicidal. I did. It lasted a very long time. I didn't want to die, but I really just wanted the pain to stop.
Yeah.
And I really did. I planned, I fantasized. But, gratefully I have another child and I have a granddaughter. So I didn't take that option. And then, after spending thousands of dollars on therapy and drugs and alternative therapies. I did finally find a couple of things that kind of brought me out of that depression, where I could at least think clearly. And that's, you know, I made some just real decisions that, you know, I had to do something different. If I wasn't going to kill myself, I had to do something different. And that's when I decided I'm going to fight. You know, I became active, and that's what keeps the sadness and the grief and the depression at bay, by doing something. Because, you know, my son is out of my control. He was 19 when he announced, even though he was really about a 13-year-old mentally, 14 maybe. Even my daughter today, when she came over, she said, you know, I mentioned about his lack of maturation, and you know, she said, Mom, he's not even a teenager. And I got the update. I said, is he still living in his virtual world? And she said, oh yeah, 100%. He lives virtually.
Wow. So very disconnected from real human relationships and connection.
Yeah.
And
He turns 27 next week.
Wow.
My goodness.
Wow.
Yeah.
Quite a period of time. It's quite a few years.
Yeah.
So just a few things. I think the first thing we need to say is that there are quite a few disorders that involve the body. And these disorders tend to manifest among people who are very sensitive during a period of sensitivity as well, such as during puberty and adolescence. It is no secret that among pubertal and adolescent girls, for instance, and there's a reason why it's girls, is precisely because of this heightened negative emotion, or the what used to be called the neurotic heightened neurosis that tends to be triggered during this period of time, because it is a very difficult period of time, adolescence. And these conditions or these disorders tend to be things like body dysmorphia, anorexia. Gender dysphoria is also one of them. Then we have other less known of these conditions, such as body integrity identity disorder, where a person feels like a body part isn't really part of them. They really want to get rid of a body part.
Yeah.
Another one, it would be false pregnancy. Sometimes you get it where some of these girls are very anxious and very, very depressed, and they're concerned all the time they might be pregnant. And they sense they would tell parents, Mom, I think I'm pregnant. I need to go for a pregnancy test. And then there's another one that's also, which occurs among boys, would be muscle dysphoria. So it is not uncommon these days anymore, especially with Instagram, especially with the focus on appearance, where we encounter these body-bound dysphoria, dissatisfaction with appearance. And with gender dysphoria, it's not just appearance, it is also the idea that I am a boy, or the idea that I am a girl. Similarly, the idea, if I'm a boy, that I have a penis. And then that it's usually that aversion to the sexual organ and what it means for them to be a boy, to be a man. So I said it is usually during this period of time where the negative emotion is heightened, mostly among girls, but we also know that there is a fraction of boys, I was one of those boys too, a fraction of boys that are very sensitive. And if you're a late bloomer, the sensitivity is even worse so when you're a boy. Girls deal better with late blooming compared to
I was a very late bloomer.
I was as well, yes.
But it sounds to me like they were, like you said, he had some social difficulties. And again, they're running to these social difficulties during this period of time, puberty and adolescence. And now suddenly he needs to live up to expectations, social expectations, but also societal expectations. And there will always be social and societal expectations. We cannot repudiate that. We cannot say, oh, if only there were no social or societal expectations. That's just the reality of being human. We're a collective species. And integrating socially, measuring up socially and societally would be something that we would have to gain mastery over. It would be a goal that we would set for ourselves, that we would have to integrate to become fully functional adults in a functioning society. So it is interesting that you mentioned that he was young enough, he was immature, and I know many girls like the cute boys. And you said that some of these girls threw themselves at him. And it sounds to me like he wasn't really emotionally, maybe even cognitively, intellectually equipped, socially equipped to deal with romantic relationships with girls.
Yeah, I mean, this one little gal, I mean, I thought they were really perfect for each other because she was quirky and kind of neurodivergent herself and talking to her mom, and they seemed to be hitting it off and everything was going great. And then, finally when he started going down this other road, and I asked him about what happened with her, and he goes, well, she just kept throwing herself at me. So I think she got ahead of him, and I think it frightened him a bit.
Did he ever end up starting the transition process where he started taking hormones? And
yes, at the Gender Health Center, yeah, he started taking hormones not long after he started at the clinic.
Is he fully transitioned now?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't
Okay.
believe so. I don't know too much. My daughter didn't mention it today, but I know I'm pretty certain he's definitely on the hormones.
Yeah. Okay.
Did he ever come out as gay?
No. And this is kind of an interesting side note, as I look back on everything. So in our family, we had very close friends who, my daughter, who's 3 years younger than my son, there was a little boy her age, and they were so cute. They looked like twins. And we were real close families. He spent tons of time at our house. And from about the time he was 3 or 4, all the adults, I mean, we knew he was gay. And, no, it was never spoken about, to any of the kids. It was never acknowledged or anything said. And for years, I mean, he was in our family. So he would be at our house, and they'd be in my daughter's bedroom with another little girl in the neighborhood, and they'd all be playing dress up. So he would call friends to come over, and they were passing him by. I mean, they didn't like hanging out with him because he was so immature. So his contemporaries, he'd make phone calls. Can so-and-so come over? Can I come up? No, the fella. And I go, well, why don't you just go play with so-and-so and the girls? And he goes, Mom, he's technically a girl. And I said, well, he goes, I don't want to. And he go back in the bedroom and get back on his video games. So he had plenty of opportunity to hang out, dress up. I mean, because nobody said a thing. I mean, this little guy would come out in heels and a skirt daily. It was just fine with everybody. But he wanted to have nothing to do with it all those years. He really had a couple of buddies that he liked, but they outgrew him. I mean, but they were buddies. I mean, they were just, playing video games or being out. We had a field behind our house, and they'd be out there with, the hose and mud and shovels, but they moved on, and he didn't.
Yeah. You see, this need to belong. This is something that was also discovered or found to be the case with the Littman study on rapid onset gender dysphoria. This researcher did research on this phenomenon where many young people, mostly girls, would suddenly, with no pre-existent evidence or signs that they ever had gender dysphoria, would suddenly come out as being trans. They would say, I have gender dysphoria, I'm actually a boy, mostly among girls. And she felt that it would usually be girls who found themselves to be socially awkward because they needed a place to belong. They would come out as transgender, and all their answers or all their explanations would sound scripted. It's almost as if they were groomed. It's almost as if they were trained to know exactly how to build their case that they were actually transgender. It was always in response to a girl or a few girls or friends from among their social group who themselves came out as transgender. It spread like wildfire, where one started with this trend to be transgender, and it just caught on with several of these other sensitive kids. And then there would be complicating factors, such as autism, and also other psychiatric conditions like anxiety, social anxiety, depression, and historical traumas. So there is most certainly a vulnerability among some to be predisposed to this kind of social contagion. But there's another very interesting factor that you mentioned, his tendency to want to escape into fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep.
I wanted to ask you all also if we could rewind just a moment. We had another, parent that we talked to, and it seemed as though the school played a huge role in supporting
Yes.
and promoting this. And so, from your perspective, what were those school years like? Did you find that that this was being supported by the school also? Did you find that they had a role to play in this or not?
I would say no, with the exception of the course at the
Uh-huh.
JC. I think they really promoted
Right.
that.
But not in high school, really.
He went to an all boys Catholic school. And in his senior year, he started buying all of this paraphernalia for bronies and My Little Pony and wearing them to school. And my husband and I would kind of tease him and say, sweetie, you're going to get beat up. And we would just kind of laugh about it. We thought it was innocent until I started realizing, oh God.
There's much more to this.
Oh yeah.
How has your husband coped?
We're divorced now.
Okay.
That this wasn't the cause, but it contributed to it. I think that's another problematic area. My husband was not one to be involved with the kids too much. He never encouraged any sporting activities. That he used to always work Saturdays, so any of the soccer and the t-ball and all that fell to me every Saturday. And then I tried to expose both my kids to all kinds of things. Neither of them really are competitive, so the sports kind of just fell away. I don't think he role modeled a positive influence for him. He just kind of was hands off, I'd say. My son, he tells my ex-husband that he doesn't want to have anything to do with me because I stress him out.
What's it been like for you to hear that? Knowing that you're doing all this for him and for his, safety and growth, and then, this is his response.
It's the heartache of my life.
Unimaginable.
It is. I just, I really believe that, the truth will be exposed and this will come crashing down, this gender ideology cult. My only prayer now is that I live long enough to see it, because I'm an older parent.
Right.
You mentioned the more rebellious he became, the more hysterical you became. How do you understand that?
I was used to, having control. And I have huge regret because it wasn't helpful. And I mean, I really believe I wasn't the mother he needed at the time.
What do you mean by that? What kind of mother do you think you needed?
I think I was, at the beginning, I was more tough on him than he was able to hang, I was like, come on, you got to straighten up, you got to, when he went off to live in the dorm at the JC, and that was a disaster. His roommate was awful. And, I just kept saying, and he went into a really bad depression. I mean, wasn't even showering. And I was like, come on, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And this is real life. And, and it just, he couldn't handle it. And my husband was totally absentee as far as any guidance or help, or I just became this force that he wanted to get away from.
I see. It sounds to me like you had quite a lot to deal with.
Yeah, I was working full time. Fortunately, I worked from home. And then at the same time, my daughter, so she was 15, 16, she was beginning to act out. She had a baby at 18, and she's a single mom now. Not the path that I wanted for her either.
Sorry to interrupt you. Sometimes when we're so overwhelmed by many different and challenging variables, we tend to want to control. We tend to assert our power to just create some order.
Yeah,
I mean,
I just, everything was imploding, and I was just trying to, put it back together.
Yeah.
So I think it is also necessary to understand, to make sense of your reaction. It wasn't just an irrational reaction. Sometimes we see that there is some intelligence behind our emotional reactions too, and it is necessary to see it for what it is.
Yeah.
But when we're so overwhelmed, when there are so many variables, when things fall apart, it is understandable why people would want to intervene and exert their power and start controlling, especially if the stakes are so high.
Yeah.
But it is interesting also to hear how you almost moved into a space of non-survival when you started developing suicidal ideation and you just wanted the pain to stop. And you lingered there for a period of time and you received psychotherapeutic help. And it's also then interesting to see how you moved through non-survival into survival. That you're a fighter now. I decided to fight. That's a state of survival.
Yeah.
Resilience.
Yeah. I mean, I went from I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I lost almost 30 pounds. I couldn't even drive myself to the therapy appointment. I had to have someone drive me because I didn't feel capable of getting my car on the freeway.
What was it about this particular therapist that had such a positive influence? Because as we said in the beginning, the therapy world has been corrupted in so many ways.
Yeah.
It's hard to find.
Honestly, there was no CBT therapy or therapist that I could point to that was helpful, really. What I did was I did 8 weeks of transcranial magnetic therapy.
Yeah.
When I had completed it, I wasn't really sure. I was still in pretty bad shape. I wasn't really sure if it helped, but it was about a month after I completed that where I made the decision to get divorced, leave the household, and start getting myself on track. A couple of my friends said, you know what, I think that is what did it, was the transcranial magnetic therapy, because it kind of lodged me off of my paralysis, I guess.
Yeah.
And then about 18 months after that, I did a series of ketamine therapy. I had a couple bad therapists, and I'd say one pretty good one, but
Yeah.
still it was not what I needed, I guess.
Sure.
Or
Society most certainly has changed. When you read books such as by Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt, The Coddling of the American Mind, parents become helicopter parents, and because of that, children never learn the skill and the capabilities of negotiating relational dynamics sufficiently because of parents who intervene all the time. And then you also get the other extreme, where there's the disconnect, where children need a bit of a bit more hand, or children need greater modeling. And you see in the past, in smaller communities, in communities that were better connected and without the internet, we had a fairly good idea who our children were mingling with.
yeah.
So by extension, there was a better guarding eye over what our children were exposed to. Now with the internet, those gates have swung open, and children at a very, very young age are being influenced by people who do not have the same care and concern for the children as parents do. And that is why we do find some of these lurkers who sneak onto some of these forums and they start grooming our children.
Oh, it's the Wild West, I'm convinced. I
Mhm.
said when shortly after I became really aware of all this, I said two things. This never could have happened without the internet,
Mhm.
and it will end when the lawsuits begin.
Mm. Is that something you're considering doing?
I don't think I have any means for a case for anything. He was an adult, he was 19.
Yeah.
Um, my only weapon is the internet,
Mhm.
social media,
Yes. Yeah.
and I'm using it.
How are you coping today?
At this moment, after having a visit from my daughter and getting the first news about my son in over 18 months, I'm still processing that.
Mhm.
On the one hand, I'm relieved that he's alive. I wouldn't say he's functioning, but he's, I guess, functioning in his little fantasy world. But
Mm.
it's pretty shocking that still, after all these years, that he can survive, is surviving in this virtual fantasy world. And I did mention this to my daughter today. I said, well, I still hold out hope, because I do believe that your full frontal cortex is not fully developed until 25. And I'm thinking he was so delayed, maybe it'll be 30 for him.
Mhm. Sure.
And, that's when she said, oh, Mom, don't hang on to that hope. She goes, he's not even a teenager mentally now. She
Mm.
goes, and I said, yeah, there's mental illness. And she
Mhm.
agreed. And she feels like he should get a diagnosis so that he can, get some sort of funding.
Sometimes even in my practice, people come in, some of them come in with pretty rough relational issues. Among other things would be something like alienation, family alienation, parental alienation, child alienation. And I sense the desperation. It's almost as if they ask me as the professional, how about we talk about this other family member? How about we figure them out so that I know exactly what to do to reestablish connection with them?
Yeah.
And it's such a difficult thing to do, because we actually don't know what's going on in the other person's mind.
Yeah.
But I can sense the desperation. They so badly want to do the right thing to reestablish connection.
Oh yeah. I mean, I wrote so many letters and texts and notes and apologies and begging. And now over the past 2 years, about once a quarter, I send a card and just tell him how much I love him and I miss him, and I'm always here.
Mm.
I don't send any money. I used to, but I don't do that anymore.
You see, what you're experiencing is what has been called ambiguous loss.
I keep it at bay by
Mhm.
doing these other things, and I
Mhm.
simply when my mind starts to go there, because I used to, it was so obsessive, I couldn't stop it. Now I stop myself and I push it out of my brain.
Yeah.
You see what is meant by this expression ambiguous loss is there is a kind of ambiguity. It's like having a child who's been kidnapped. Is the child gone or are they still alive?
Yeah.
How do we relate to the other person now? Do we relate to them as someone who's gone? Or we relate to them as someone who's still around? If they're still around, why does it feel like they're gone? So that's where the ambiguity comes in.
Yeah.
There's ambiguous loss with someone developing a neurological condition such as dementia. It's still the same person, but it's not the same person. That's where the ambiguity comes in. Your son, for instance, now, so there is ambiguity in the sense that he's still there, but there's not much contact. You don't know how he is transformed, how he's changed because of these influences, hormones. Because we know that cross-sex hormones do have an effect on brain structure, personality,
Right.
etc.
It's also
Mm.
that phenomenon of being there but not being there adds so much pain because the people around you have no sympathy. You know, that it's like if my child was dead, I would get a lot of sympathy.
Yes.
But
say more about that, about how other people have responded to you and without the sympathy. What have you noticed?
Well, I'll share a quick story. After one particular breakdown with my closest friend, I kept saying, he's dead. It's like he's dead.
Yeah.
And she later sent me a text and said, you know what? People who have really lost a child would want to slap the shit out of you. You still have your child.
Have you found a group that has been supportive? I mean, you're involved with PIT quite a bit, right? So
other people that are speaking out, we network, quite a bit, but it's a very lonely journey. It's the loneliest pain I've ever experienced. I mean, because I couldn't talk to my husband about it, because he just wanted to go away. My current partner is pretty much the same way. He wants to be sympathetic, but they just want it to go away. That's kind of a typical male thing. My daughter, of course, she's completely captured. So, we don't even broach it anymore. I only waste my breath or time with people who are curious. Okay. Anyone who's captured or doesn't affect them, so they don't have any interest, I'm not trying to convince anyone. But if someone brings it up and makes a statement, I write letters back to people who post op-eds, in my local paper, and tell them, when they have an opinion, I try and educate them. And I just say, you don't have to believe me or this thing that I reference or that thing. All I ask is that you be curious.
Yes.
You've made a statement here. Here's some other facts. Why don't you be curious? Why is there this huge 4,000% increase?
Right.
Why? And, I'll get pushback. Sometimes I've actually gotten responses from people, and they give me theirs. And I said, all I ask is be curious. And I don't really hear from them again. So I think drip by drip, it'll happen. It's the truth always wins.
I guess what you're saying is you decided that whatever happens between you and your son, whatever happens with him in future, you want to make sure that you've survived.
Yes, and I feel an obligation to speak the truth and spare other people.
Right.
What's the one piece of advice you would give to other parents?
You're not helping your child by participating. The school board meetings I've been to, I'm like, let these kids be non-binary, whatever they want to be. But, like socially transitioning and pronouns and names. I mean, you can even have another name, but and everybody has nicknames, but socially transitioning is extremely powerful.
Yep.
And I would not budge on that for a minute. If I was a young parent today, having kids that could potentially be exposed to this or be vulnerable to it, you got the captain of the football team, that's his tribe. You don't probably have to worry about that kid.
No.
Or the, super duper academic who's going to be able to apply to Harvard or Ivy League schools, but if you have a vulnerable kid, honestly, after sitting in the school board meetings, I think I would homeschool. I used to look askance at people who homeschooled, and I thought, oh, I don't know about you. Today, I think I would homeschool. After listening to the teachers and the administrators, it's gone almost too far. I don't know if we're gonna be able to get it back with schools.
Yeah.
I think I would homeschool. I might leave the state. I would set up a co-op with other parents so I could homeschool. So I could still work. I would go to great lengths knowing what I know. Yeah. Oh, and I would go scorched earth on the internet.
You see, there is a point at which accommodation becomes encouragement.
Well, you're in a fight now. You're in a fight with the schools and with the politicians and the media and the medical profession. It's a fight.
It's a fight.
But what I mean by accommodation becoming encouragement is some of these schools are so accommodating. They accommodate various different kids with various different trends. And I understand the impulse to want to accommodate so that they can figure out who they are.
Yeah.
But at some point, that accommodation, which is a type of intervention aimed at helping, has what we call an iatrogenic effect. In other words, it has an unwanted, harmful effect of encouraging the thing we're actually trying to prevent.
Yeah, I mean, some of these kids, you can tell they get up at these school board meetings and they're drunk with power.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I asked one of the school board members in an email, I said, when did we start letting kids have adults do their bidding? If they came to school under the influence of drugs or alcohol, you would certainly have to let a parent know.
Yeah.
If they're failing their grades, you certainly have to let a parent know. But if they want to change their name and gender on their school papers and such, I mean, that's significant. Any parent who gave a minor drugs and alcohol would be turned into CPS.
Yes.
We don't let children get tattoos or alcohol or tobacco if a parent or a teacher gave those things to a child, but yet we will give them hormones and chest binders.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. Are you sufficiently taking care of yourself such that you will survive this?
I'm pretty confident. Every once in a while, I get a little scared. I do take care of myself. I go to hot yoga 4 times a week.
Oh.
That kind of saves me. It's my little prayer and meditation time.
Hot yoga's wonderful. It's very
that's
beautiful.
That's when wonderful. I talk to my son when I'm in yoga.
Yeah.
So that's helped me tremendously to cope.
You have healthy supports?
Yeah, I have a good partner. I do wish I had someone close who really knows me that could be more sympathetic. I don't have that because I've lost the close friends. The only people who are sympathetic are the people that, I am in this with, or strangers who happen to hear something and they'll ask me about it and I share the details and they're horrified and they're like, my God. And they're very sympathetic, but they're not people I'm really close with.
Right.
So, yeah, that's hard.
Your activism in your way.
Yeah. Whenever I have the opportunity, if I'm available, or like I say, if I see an op-ed in the paper, I will respond to it. Or if I can go to a school board meeting If I'm not able to speak, I'll send an email to all the board members afterward, stating my position, my experience. It's like, you can't unring the bell once they've heard it. I think every little bit we're going to have to keep on keeping on.
Charlotte, this is heartbreaking. I can sense the difficulty. I can sense the confusion, at times the disorientation, and the desperation. I can sense that.
Yeah, it's completely destabilizing.
Oh,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But I also sense strength and resilience, and I also see how you apply your mind and how you're determined to survive this. And that is encouraging.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not going to do anyone any good if I don't take care of myself. And like I say,
No.
my daughter and my granddaughter, they need me.
Thank you for your time. And thank you for
Charlotte, it
the
was such a
courage.
pleasure. Yes, and it was such an honor to be able to be a part of your story here and for you to share with our listeners.
Thank you. And thank you for all that you're doing. It's going to take all of us.